time in the interface session. We do that all the time.
He's gone out on the break.
15 minutes late.
Can't tell you how many times we've done that.
Don't forget the big
All on the numbers field.
heck red hot.
Yeah. I flew to places, so I'm like, I don't even have a rental car. I like to go and get in a rental car, and I go, it's in, like, you don't have a reservation.
You want to make an announcement?
You know, wait, so you can share it, like, when it goes live.
No, but they're going to just, oh, that was the teaser. Oh. An event trying to help you reach one of those numbers. Who's the mountain man and one of the dogs?
Oh, look at him. Oh, how nice.
Okay. Your flash drive, we can
Looks
plug
good.
that right in the back here. So, I have two videos.
My father used to say the first rule of child rearing
No, I don't
is
think
keep
so.
them
I think
alive.
we're just-
If you can do that, there's a chance they'll come out okay.
Here we are. No, no, so, oh, we got a display up here.
That's what I keep saying.
That would be
That's
okay.
what I was babysitting. They made
Oh,
they
hang
lived
on,
in.
hang on a second.
Yeah.
This is John Brunel, he's our IT wizard.
Right now I have on it.
But,
Not really.
I am,
I only have so many outputs and so many inputs. You have an HDMI?
that was nothing, sir.
That does sound like, that sounds like a problem. That may take me a few more minutes to get resolved.
Will this do me any?
No.
You can if it can be done.
Hang on, I have
So
lots of
you
full
should
magic.
do that. So there's a bathroom right up here. Which you can save the lights on, but possibly not so you can save the show.
Then where did I go to save it?
I don't know if we have any magnets, because we might be able to put up that.
Oh, yeah.
Put some of that signage up, or we can just lean it.
Yeah, we-
Up against something.
I was actually, my son was in North Carolina.
Sorry we're running late.
That's okay.
My daughter
Where
was,
does it say?
wife were in Virginia for a weekend. I was alone for, well, I went to my mom's house.
Andy's gonna do most of the presentation. We're gonna split it up.
Do you want me to do a bit of an introduction to this, or?
Sure. Yeah, Andy, so Andy's a bear biologist. And then I'm just a wildlife damage specialist, but we both. So he works in the North Country for bear issues, I work in the southern part of the state.
Yeah.
Looks like a Norman rock.
Oh, you're making it harder now.
I think it's probably about 25 years.
I was gonna say, yeah, he doesn't have nothing for that.
If it's too complicated.
Oh, really?
What, is he get a flash drive with it?
Funny, 'cause both our kids
Well,
have big ears.
So, the presentation's on, the video's on. So, yeah, they play on this fine. Same presentation.
My daughter, she's getting married in July. Finally.
You would have saved it. Click over there, show observations, and it'll list all the observations you saved. These two are.
Yeah.
I just got an email from Cornell's. Electric outages.
Thank you.
Really?
It was all working 2 minutes ago.
No test.
Hey Russ, are you seeing any output?
Pass that one down there.
No.
I thought it was something.
What do you need?
Jinxing us. No, I just, we were going to change the cable. What did I do with my cable? That was over there. We tried driving, it doesn't know HDMI, so that's what happened there. But then we came back to this guy, and now this guy's not working. Huh. So, that's what's weird. No, come on, stop. It's just somebody stopped working. This isn't making sense. Let's touch it there. Keyboard is on.
Well, I knew that was only a matter of time.
So what are you trying to do? Trying to use the, right now I have it turned back. I took this out of the time because this was causing me, probably causing this problem in the past. I'm gonna get it back in here. And it's putting it back on. No issues. And now it's
Hey, Bear.
That's not fixed. Yeah.
Well, we
Did you
can
ever
always
read
take
A Walk in the Woods?
Yeah.
Do you remember when he
Totally not
goes to the
disgusting.
bookstore and there's the book about how to, what to do when you
And
see
then
a
we can go
bear?
live on the phone.
And he says it's very important to know what kind of bear.
Yeah, we just, Jay,
So
you
we're
guys
streaming live on YouTube and we're on the local cable channel.
Oh, good.
So the microphones are going to be picking you up.
Okay.
Just be aware that there's a microphone
Blackberry,
Yep.
they're
as you're
perfectly
speaking.
not
Try to
gonna
speak towards the microphone.
Yep.
Whether you're
Okay.
better or what.
Do you have a home audience? They seem excited.
Good.
All I know is sometimes when I'm looking to fishing spots that look for, I don't think, I mean, I usually have the dog with me, but I think.
If you want to, yeah, if you want to.
And I got every
If
cord
not
book
because
too.
fishing
Well,
is
with you, we can just,
Yeah.
we can just,
Yeah.
no, we'll do the same thing still. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Sing on that.
Sing and whistle and everything else like that, yeah.
Before you guys came, it was all working just fine. You had the output, right?
I had the feed, yeah.
You know, if you go out west, to Banff, and Jasper, town, you walk in the grocery store, you know, a
I didn't know
7-Eleven,
beers would eat
and they sell
chicken.
bear spray
Oh
right
yeah,
there.
that's one of our most common calls
I
throughout the
haven't
year.
heard any complaint about that. We have a lot of chickens.
Yeah.
I haven't heard any complaints about that yet.
Yeah, that's usually how it goes.
You'll be able to give me some tips before it happens.
Yeah.
Either that, or you'll be able to stop the kids.
Yeah.
Or both, it could be both.
It could be both. This is what you do. You can do it all. Worst comes to worst, John, we can just put my phone up on, I could just do the selfie thing I do on other ones.
Are these videos you could also find on YouTube, or are they?
No.
Not helpful at all.
Yeah.
Gotta laugh, John.
I laugh every day.
Not now, but.
Remember what happened? It was working
Not when a
fine.
half hour ago it was all working just fine.
But that's how it goes. Technology.
It's the Chromebox that's not working. It was working. Just cheats it over. Excuse me, might make some noise. Sorry.
Need some WD-40.
That's all right. I'll fix that in a minute. Ah, found it.
So we're not on YouTube yet.
We will be in a minute.
Yeah.
We are on YouTube?
Placeholder maybe.
Yeah, I found the problem. All the cable yanking, we just yanked it out. All right, give me 2 seconds, you'll have it back.
We've got 6 viewers already and nothing's interesting on
Yes.
the screen.
Tell James
We're
we're
being,
back.
we're being, content here.
They just posted the link on the website.
Sorry again.
We weren't kidding.
Sounds expensive, John.
It is expensive, but it weighs 1,000 pounds. It's a pain. All right, you should have hopefully a video.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, good. No.
Said there was a bathroom.
Yep. Right up there and then door to the left. Perfect.
I've lost your feed, John.
Yep.
That's back.
The weight of this thing is.
Jay just went and got his computer, John.
Yeah, well, we're good now. All right. Don't touch anything. All right, here's your drive. I'm assuming on the
Yep.
there.
Yep.
This one here?
Yep.
Well, that'd be the first.
This is when the presenter gets the sweats.
Yeah, right. Have fun.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun. Hey, Matt,
Yes.
could you come over here and sign into your town account?
Yes.
See, you're in the room, so. Don't go there.
I think I do. I don't know if I should.
Yeah, then when, the computer doesn't have an HDMI output though, so.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's no HDMI.
So it'll be a full email address. Who needs some
Now I'm
fun?
talking about fishing game.
Oh, fishing game. I would agree that this computer's probably gotta be 10 years old.
Oh,
if not
yeah.
older. But listen,
We'll make it easy.
no, and we're, you know, if Jay gets here and still not working, we'll figure it out.
Sits up here in bed.
Unless he gets pulled over on Albuquerque, because he's obviously driving way too fast.
We'll make a phone call. Give him a green, give him a blue lights all the way through.
I know where he lives. He's up in town.
It's already been there and yeah.
Store and grow.
Thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.
Just advance, just leave it down. Either way, back and forth, back and down. Okay. Is there another presentation on that too?
Will this work over here?
Yep, should. Don't break it, don't breathe on it.
Do you wanna wait for that little fella, or?
Do you wanna wait for Jay, or you're good to have him start?
Dan.
Go ahead. No, no, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll be in the ZBA meeting if you need anything.
Okay, thanks, Joe.
Report back from the DPA.
Okay.
I have to come back and put it all back together, so.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Well, thanks for having us down. My name's Andrew Timmons. I'm the bear project biologist for New Hampshire. I work out of the Lancaster office, which is our northernmost region of the state, and Dan Bailey works out of Concord. Dan is our animal damage biologist. So collectively, we work on a lot of bear issues around the state. And I understand the reason for the request is that people are seeing more bears down here this past season, and maybe folks have some concerns about what bears on the landscape mean. And so we're gonna give you some. This talk's gonna have a few different parts to it. It's gonna just briefly go over bear management in New Hampshire, population size, where we are, where we're headed. But a lot of our talk is gonna really focus on ways to coexist with bears and ways to avoid conflicts with the bears. Because, you know, they're not a bad critter to have around. It just takes often some increased human responsibility in order to avoid attracting them into our yards and having foods available for them. So I'll get right into it. Okay, so a little bit on bear population management, and I don't know what's happened there, but we'll get through it. So we manage bears regionally in the state. We have 6 different bear management regions, and each one of these regions has its own specific bear population objective. Basically, the mid part of the state, these are the areas where we have the highest bear densities. And in the more northern part of the state, historically bear densities in the southern part of the state were pretty low, but that has changed over time. We've certainly, you know, Massachusetts has a expanding bear population. We know we have bears that are increasing their range northward out of Massachusetts, and we also have a strong residential bear population down here that's been expanding. So we know there's more bears on the landscape throughout the state, and that has been the management objective to some degree. So wow, this really has, I don't even recognize that. Yeah, this really has changed some of the graphics a little, but we'll skip that one and come to here. So this is kind of currently what our statewide, our management goal is 0.52 bears per square mile. We're quite a bit higher than that at 0.74. To kind of summarize what management has done, back in the early 90s, we had a statewide bear population of about 3,000 bears statewide. Public desire, so we manage wildlife in New Hampshire based on, you know, the department does not own the wildlife. The citizens of New Hampshire own the wildlife. Our job is to manage these populations at levels that the citizens want to see. So with bears back in the early 90s, there was a desire to kind of foster a growing bear population, make some changes to allow bear populations to grow. And we certainly did that through the 90s and into the 2000s. In our current management plan, kind of the northern part of the state and the southern part of the state, The objectives are to kind of stabilize, but we are looking to make some reductions more in the central part of the state. And that's because that is the area of the state where we're seeing increased human population growth. And as you have more people moving into areas, a loss of habitat, it puts bears and humans in closer, kind of increases that bear-human interface. And that's generally when we see the public start to want to see less animals on the landscape. So right now, our objectives are to reduce the bear population size in a few regions, but not drastically. And the way we manage bear populations in New Hampshire is through hunting. We have an annual bear hunting season, which starts in September, September 1st. And we rely on this annual removal of bears in order to meet our population objectives. We allow 3 methods of bear hunting in New Hampshire: baiting, still hunting or stalking, and the use of hounds. You won't see much of this type of hunting in the more southern part of the state. It's actually not allowed down in this region, but in the more central and White Mountains and northern part of the state, it is a method of bear hunting. So we allow 3 methods of bear hunting, and our harvest over time has increased pretty steadily. That's a function of a few different things. This is supposed to be the years, but this would roughly be back in the 80s up until 2021. So over time, we have seen bear harvest increase, and it's for a few different reasons. One, our bear population has grown. Secondly, as bear populations have grown, interest in hunting bears has grown. So we've seen this upward trajectory. And a year ago, for the first time, we exceeded 1,000 bears on our harvest, which was the first time ever. When I started the position back in 2002, I think it was this year, we saw a really high harvest that year of a little over 500 bears. And we actually closed the season down early because we were concerned about overharvest. But things have really changed. We've learned that our bear population is pretty robust. It's growing at an annual rate of about 2 to 3%. And really, to keep it at the level that is consistent with public desire, we need to have relatively strong annual harvest. Yeah.
Why have the fishing game restricted hunting with hounds in the southern?
It's mostly an issue of road density and just human density. You know, this landscape down here is not conducive to cutting dogs loose to chase a bear because they're going to be crossing roads. The chances of the bear or the dog getting hit. So even if it was open, I don't think you'd find a houndsman that would want to run down in this part of the day. So it's mostly a function of infrastructure and human density.
I wasn't going to volunteer or laugh, but
So now we're going to kind of switch gears and move into kind of this whole notion of coexistence with bears and what bears mean to different people. And you know, people have varied opinions of wildlife, and we find that people's opinions can vary pretty dramatically from their opinions towards deer or moose versus some of these other species such as coyote or fox or bobcats. And you know, our ability to get people to change their own behavior really is rooted in their value systems. You know, if you grew up thinking highly about a particular wildlife species, you're probably more inclined to appreciate that animal and to make changes to avoid conflicts with that animal. If you grow up with kind of a negative experience or a negative opinion of a certain animal, you know, you tend to view them as vermin. And bears really fall into this category. Bears were bountied in the state of New Hampshire until 1955. So up until 1955, you could get paid to shoot a bear year-round. You'd get paid by the town clerk, and they were viewed as a pest and viewed as a vermin. And the reason is you know, the early settlers to the state viewed bears as competition. You know, they may kill their livestock or damage their crops. So, you know, we're trying to change public opinion of what bears are and what bears mean, and it's an upward battle at times. And we find people on both ends of the spectrum. We find people that idolize bears, think very highly of bears, kind of ritualize bears. And we see people that are do pretty terrible things to bears. This is an x-ray from an orphan cub that we picked up, and that little dot right there is a BB that's lodged in its near its lung. So somebody was seeing this cub around and shot it with a BB gun. So opposite ends of the spectrum. People think very highly of these animals. People think very lowly of these animals. And we have to kind of deal with people throughout that range of opinion. So what really probably takes up most of my and Dan's time, particularly during spring and summer, and it's not a negative thing, but it's dealing with bear-human conflicts. Because like I said, you know, as you have growing bear populations, as you have more people in New Hampshire, just that, you know, bears and people are competing for the same space. You know, they're living in closer proximity to one another, and that increases the likelihood of a conflict. So I'll give you a minute to read that, but basically in a nutshell, what it's saying is, you know, don't wait for bear complaints to become severe before you try to start addressing them. You know, because once these bears start to get a foothold, and once their behavior starts to change, and once they get used to getting food in residential areas, it can be very hard to break that habit. So we want to get on these issues. You know, we want to avoid them from starting in the first place. So I'll talk a little bit about conflict trends in New Hampshire, and I'm sure this graph is going to be, well, it's showing the trend. So this is what trends have done over time. So again, this is back in the early 90s, ranging up through to 2021. And it shows you what bear-human complaints have done over time. And so you'll notice a couple things. One, upward trajectory from the 90s and the early 2000s, and that's not a surprise. You had more bear, you know, you had increasing bear populations in the state. People were learning to live with bears, trying to learn how to coexist with bears. Since that time, it's hard to envision stable here, but you know, if you kind of look at this trend line from the last 20 years, although it's highly varied from one year to the next, and we'll talk about why that is, you're not necessarily seeing upward trajectory. But some differences are, this year there was about 3,500 bears in New Hampshire. Now we have about 6,800 bears in New Hampshire. So population is more than double. In our human population, I think back here was around 1 million, give or take, and now I think it's estimated about 1.3 million. So a lot more bears, a lot more people, but not necessarily a doubling in conflict or a tremendous increase in conflict. And I think that reflects the fact that we have made some headway as far as educating people about bears.
So the orange is the total population, the blue is the conflict?
So both are conflict. The blue is agricultural related conflicts, in this pink. And again, these graphs are getting really distorted from what they're really supposed to look like. And I'm not sure why that is, but we'll make it. So blue is agricultural conflicts. The pink, or the pink color, is complaints related primarily to property damage as well as health and human safety. So you'll see, you know, agricultural complaints have been pretty steady over time, although they are showing some increase. But most of our complaints are related to bears coming into yards, getting bird feeders, knocking over trash cans. Those are what really drive complaint loads. You know, bears have the ability to get pretty comfortable in residential areas. You know, they're in searching for these high quality foods that are highly available in many backyards. And you know, bears are a lot more adaptable to us than I think we are to them. And it's not uncommon for bears in these situations to just start learning how to kind of panhandle and just to constantly go from yard to yard searching for any available food source. And we see this, particularly in bears that are born in that environment and raised in that environment. And these are some yearling bears from Hanover, New Hampshire that, you know, that's all they knew, because that's all the mother knew, because that's what the public was continually providing for them. But at times, these bears can cross thresholds. Their behavior, well, so this is a video that I don't believe will play, but if it was to play, what you'd see is a sow and two cubs that are, she comes, you know, this is one of those doorbell cameras, so she comes in and she gets up on her hind feet and she's sniffing the windows. And this particular bear family was up in the Bretton Woods area, and this sow ended up going into over 30 condominiums because she just is so used to finding human foods. She'd never break a window, but if the window was open, she'd just pry the window back and go in. And you know, this went on for almost 2 summers, and eventually we had to capture and destroy these bears because their behavior had just gotten to the point where it was hard to get them to do anything different. So these are some of the challenges we face. And, you know, issues can escalate to the point where bears start entering homes and they have to be destroyed. They're either destroyed by the landowner or they have to be caught and destroyed by the department. And the background on this is this person was feeding their dog out on the back steps day after day, and the bear was getting the dog food. Wasn't a big deal to him, you know, didn't bother him. It's no big deal. Well, eventually one day the dog food wasn't there, but the container dog food was just inside a window. And, you know, bears have an incredible sense of smell, and, you know, it's not a big leap for a bear to get food off a front step, and then all of a sudden it's not there, but can smell it through a doorway or a window. You know, to them, they're just food searching. You know, they're not ripping into this house to be aggressive to people. They're just thinking, food, I want that food. But, you know, we need, you know, the take-home message is we can prevent bears from getting to this point. You know, don't let them get that foothold. To a lot of people simply don't, it doesn't bother them if the bear's getting the bird feeder every day. It's not a big deal. But, you know, it is a big deal because it's teaching that bear that behavior, and it's teaching that panhandling and that just that consistent, persistent behavior that we see in bears. So we'll talk about some of the causes of bear-human conflicts. You're dealing with an animal that is highly food motivated. You know, the survival and the reproductive success of a bear is strongly linked to its ability to get high quality foods throughout the different seasons of the year. You know, they can probably be described as a stomach with 4 legs. You know, they like to eat. And if we lived in a perfect world, there would be natural foods available for bears at all times of the year. You know, this time of year, you know, there'd be an early quick green up, and there'd be all kinds of emerging green vegetation for bears to eat. As we got into summer, there'd be blueberry crops and raspberries and blackberries, and then in fall we'd always have good crops of acorns or beech nuts. But that's not reality. Mother Nature isn't always that kind, and bears have to deal with wide swings of periods of very low foods in periods of high abundant foods. And at times, bears don't survive. You know, spring can be a particularly rough time for bears, particularly young bears, and they can die of starvation. You know, this time of year, I tell you, it looks a lot different down here than the part of the state I live in. You know, starting to see some green grass, but up north, you know, there's not a lot to eat for a bear yet. You know, it's still been kind of cold. Winter's just let out. These bears are coming out of hibernation. They've lost 25 to 50% of their body weight that they're looking to regain, so they're hungry, and the foods that are available on the landscape are not very plentiful. So it's a tough time of year for bears. So, no surprise, what really leads to the bulk of our bear-human conflicts is the presence of human-related foods, be it in the form of garbage that's not properly stored, or the bird feeder that's left out after March 15th or April 1. You know, we lure bears into our environment because we provide a lot of food to them, whether we mean to do it or not. This graph is kind of wacky looking. What it's supposed to show is, well, we'll just skip it. I can say it easier than I can describe it. You know, we definitely see a strong link between annual natural food abundance in bear complaints. And what this graph is showing is the annual production of raspberries. And when we see raspberry crops decline, we see spikes in complaints. And it's a very close relationship. And it kind of simplifies the woodland diet of a bear. They eat a lot more than just raspberries, but raspberries are one of our main summer food sources for bears. So point being is, bears know how to get natural food, and they prefer to get natural food when it's available. But when it's not, they're going to supplement, and they're going to supplement in backyards. This pie chart is showing, you know, if you look at the number of complaints in any given year, it doesn't matter if it's 300 complaints or 1,000 complaints, the breakdown's always the same. The three biggest components of annual bear complaints are garbage, unsecured garbage, bird feeders, and chickens. You know, those are the three top categories that account for about 85% of our annual bear complaints. So if you keep hearing these press releases from the department talking about take your bird feeders down by April 1, or you know, secure your garbage, it's because we're trying to pound a message into people that really is related to what's driving our annual bear complaints. You know, those are the big three. If we could remove those, if we could get everybody to properly secure garbage, take bird feeders down, and get electric fence for their chickens, we could remove about 80% of our annual bear complaints. In New Hampshire, and this is all pre-COVID. Prior to COVID, New Hampshire was a destination spot. You know, a lot of people, in terms of New England states, New Hampshire has the fastest growing human population. And like I said, that was pre-COVID. I suspect that the numbers are very different now, but we've just seen a real influx of people who want to move into New Hampshire and live in New Hampshire. And like I talked about earlier, more people, that's a direct competition for space with wildlife, not excluding bears. So this graph, so you look at, and numbers are going to be hard to read for some of you perhaps, but if you look at what's available for a bear to eat during different times of the year, natural foods, acorns, beech nuts, raspberries, and you look at the amount of protein, the amount of fat, the amount of carbohydrates in those foods, and then you compare that to sunflower seed. There really is no comparison. It's easy to understand why bears are going to go after sunflower seed every time. It's very high in fat. It's high test to a bear. A bear is going to struggle to find any natural food on the landscape that even comes close to the protein and the fat levels found in sunflower seed. And remember, the survival and the reproductive success of these animals depends on their ability to put on body fat. So if you're hungry and you're trying to bulk up, are you going to go for fruit, which is low in fat but high in carbs, or are you going to go for something like sunflower seeds, which is really high in fat and protein? So, you know, and unfortunately there's a lot of people who are still feeding birds throughout the summer months, and it just helps you understand why bears are so quickly drawn into backyards where there's bird feeders.
Quick question about hummingbirds.
Yes.
Can we feed hummingbirds?
So hummingbird feeders aren't nearly the draw as a seed feeder. If you have a bear that's used to entering yards and looking for that dangling bird feeder, they may go to a hummingbird feeder. I think you're okay trying it unless you start attracting a bear, but it's certainly not the draw that a seed feeder is. And, you know, just can't reiterate enough, a lot of people feed birds year-round. We have been always using the April 1 as the deadline, but in the last several years, because of our more mild winters, usually around the second week in March, we're putting out a press release basically saying, if you live in the more southern part of the state, by March 15th, you probably ought to get them down. You got a little more time up north because of the extended winter, but you know, this is high test for a bear. And you know, the other thing that doesn't work is, you know, leaving them out during the day, take them in at night. You know, one, there's a bunch of spilled seeds still under the feeder, and you're just gonna cause that bear to start coming during daylight hours. You know, they quickly figure out the schedule. Yes?
Getting questions from, the town residents that aren't here. And one is that we had an extensive harvesting done of the state forest here in town on the Albuquerque. And a lot of people are wondering if that harvesting of, or the logging created this influx of bears into our neighborhoods that we're seeing now.
Probably not. Obviously, habitat removal can be an issue. Wide-scale habitat removal and removal of the important foods certainly can cause bears to shift where they're going to food search. But an individual log job on a particular piece of state-owned land is probably not the true. My guess is that the bear numbers have been building over time, and it's more the annual fluctuations in food as well as the amount of human-related foods that people have out is what's really causing the influx and causing you to see more bears.
How do you know how many bears are in our town?
Well, we're modeling bear populations large scale, statewide level. I talked about those 6 bear management regions. We have reasonable estimates of bear density at those regional level sizes. But it would be very hard for us to know at an individual town level.
Okay.
It just would. Bears are not easy to census because, they have some behaviors that make them at times very observable and other times very unobservable. So they're a hard critter to go out and count and index. So we rely a lot on population models and hunter sightings. It all plays a role in it.
They travel pretty far.
They have wide home ranges. A female bear has a home range that's typical around 6 to 8 square miles, but a male can have a home range 50 to 100 square miles, depending on
How many?
50 square miles upwards to 100 square miles. That's incorporating breeding, dispersal, and movements, but male home ranges are significantly larger than females.
That's gonna make them hard to count too.
Yes. And we have people that, we've had a real issue with people intentionally feeding bears in New Hampshire. We've gotten a better handle on it in the last few years due to a rule that was passed that I'll talk about a little bit later. But, obviously it's teaching bears the behavior that it's teaching bears to seek out people for easy handouts. So, if you know of anybody who's feeding bears, you got to report them. You got to let us know. We're good about keeping it anonymous how we learn, but this is stuff that absolutely will cause a lot of issues within the community if people start feeding bears, because you're giving bears the wrong message. You're telling them that it's okay to approach people because there's going to be a food reward. And there's also this inadvertent feeding that goes on. This bird feeder was not, this is different from the previous slide. This bird feeder wasn't put out intentionally for the bear. The homeowner probably never expected a bear to be there, but it doesn't really matter in the end. It's still damaging, whether it's intentional feeding and inadvertent feeding. And the way the rule reads is, if you have a food source out that starts attracting bears and starts causing conflicts, you're in violation. So you'll be warned initially, and then if you refuse to remove the food attractant, you can be fined $1,000. But that was passed in 2006, and we put it in place to start going after some of these intentional bear feeding sites. Probably the most severe one I ever dealt with in my career was in Warren, New Hampshire, where people were feeding upwards to 30 bears for over 20 years. And that's a pretty extreme example, but you'd be amazed the amount of people that will start feeding a single bear or a couple bears, and very detrimental to the well-being.
Is it just for the novelty of it?
It is. And bears have the ability to do property damage. We talk about people's level of appreciation for wildlife and bears. Well, if you come home and find your garage door ripped apart, that's not going to really help put a positive spin on the presence of bears on the landscape. And the reason the bear did this to the door is it could smell garbage on the other side. So, you know, I'm gonna get into how to avoid these type of conflicts here, but, you know, bears do have you know, they're strong, agile animals, they have the ability to do a lot of damage in their food searching. And to some, just the presence of a bear is a negative thing, and, you know, unfortunately, you know, the media and folklore has always kind of portrayed bears as these vicious, marauding animals, and they're simply not, you know. Yeah, they know how to adapt to us, and they know how to be persistent, but they're really not a danger to people's well-being. You know, we tell everybody that any wild animal is unpredictable, and they are, but, you know, you don't need to live your life in fear. You know, you don't need to avoid going outside. You don't need to be scared about the presence of a bear. You just have to be aware of how to interact with bears and how to avoid teaching bears to consistently come to your yard for food. And there's a lot of negative consequences for bears. You know, bears that get comfortable around people have shorter lifespans. They get hit on the road. And the other issue that we're starting to see a little bit is we're seeing some really big female bears that are having increased litter sizes. And I think it's a reflection of these bears having access to high quality, high calorie human foods. They become no longer dependent on the natural fluctuations in natural foods. They're getting top quality food throughout every month of the year, every year. So, you know, we're seeing increase in reproductive rates in some situations. And remember, our objective statewide for our bear population is to either stabilize it or to reduce it, not to increase it. So, you know, this is hurting us a little bit. You know, 10 years ago, you hardly ever heard of a sow with 4 cubs, once in a while, but it's becoming more of a consistent thing. We get reports pretty readily of throughout the state of sows with 4 cub litters, and I can think of a sow with 5 cub litters. And in most situations, this is because these bears have access to supplemental feed. And bears can get themselves in predicaments due to things we leave on the landscape. This is a bear with its head stuck in a plastic jug, and what's really interesting is 2 years in a row in the same location, 2 different bears ended up in this situation. So obviously somebody's putting something out on the landscape that bears are getting attracted to, and the bear gets his head stuck in. In both cases, we were able to sedate the bear and get this container off. But, you know, this isn't what we want to see our wildlife.
Did you find out where they came from?
No, we never did. So now I'm going to kind of talking about, you know, what we can do. You know, how can we coexist with these critters without a lot of conflicts? And this is a very common call we get. You know, when people have a bear show up in their yard, you know, they want that bear gone. Come get your bear. And, you know, that's not reality. You know, we're not going to be moving bears all around the state. It's counterproductive. Bear population's high enough where as long as the attractant remains, another bear is going to find it. And
what kind of bear is that?
And we do it occasionally. We've been politically forced to do it occasionally, and it doesn't work. We have, you know, telemetry data showing it doesn't work. So, you know, the reality of it is if we have to set a bear trap to catch a bear, it's generally going to be lethal. And, you know, that's not how we want to manage our bears. So we trap very few bears, and it's not the tool.
What is that?
So this is this shows the movements of a female bear that was moved from Hanover, New Hampshire, up into the northern part of the state, and this is her travels back. But
That's just one bear?
One bear, but she finally made it back to Hanover, and you know, it puts the animal in a lot of stress. It increases the likelihood that animal's going to get killed because it's crossing roads. It's interacting with unknown bears and unknown territory. It's really not an efficient way to resolve conflict.
Did you total up the mileage for that round trip there?
I forget the number, but it's thousands.
It's 6 months.
Well, it took about a year, but
You're smart as a boy.
But, so one unique thing that we have here in New Hampshire is we have a partnership with USDA Wildlife Services, and Dan's position is kind of a joint position between New Hampshire Fish and Game and USDA Wildlife Services. So we have the ability here in this state to go at bear-human conflicts both through a state and federal partnership, and that's been pretty effective.
Do you also, coordinate with Vermont, Canada, and Maine on certain situations?
On some things, yeah. Yeah, we work closely with biologists from those states at different times. Most states have their own individual program, but there's some overlap with neighbors. So the real goal of this program is to reduce and hopefully prevent bear-human conflicts using a few different approaches. One is to educate people, make people more aware about bears and what bears mean, provide technical assistance, promote long-term and lasting solutions. Moving a bear is not a long-term lasting solution. We want to work with people and empower people to have the awareness and the education and the tools to prevent bear issues from happening again, and to promote coexistence. It's acting really funky. Literature, I brought some here. I think it's been handed out, but obviously a more educated and informed public is going to make better decisions as far as their own practices around their yards, and they're going to be more willing and understanding about how to make some changes in order to avoid conflicts. And really, if you can remember three things living in bear country, and if you live in New Hampshire, you're in bear country, and that's to be more aware, to be more responsible, and to have some tolerance. Recognize that there are times in the year when these animals face real hardships on the landscape. There's not a lot to eat. A bear wandering in your community to find some easy food is not, it's not the end of the world. It's, you got to just recognize it for what it is and learn how to just be responsible with your food attractants. In real issues we see, you can have 10 people living on the street. 9 people can be doing the right thing, but it only takes one person to cause, to encourage that bear to keep coming around. So sometimes peer pressure is important.
There's concern among residents about walking their dogs at night.
Yep.
And running into a bear.
Yep.
How likely is that?
So what I will say about dogs is leash dogs have never been an issue. The only time we have issues with bears and dogs is if it's a person with a dog that's off leash and it's an aggressive dog that will go after a bear. Generally, even in that situation, the bear's going to run, might climb a tree, but depending on the dog and depending on the bear, that could result in an entanglement between bear and dog.
But a
leash dog is
by
a
person,
non-issue.
The bear's gonna avoid.
Yep, bears are going to hear you coming, and they're just going to run the other way. Most of the time, you won't even, they'll be gone before you ever know they were there.
Chris is as big as the bear, so.
There you go. Can we all borrow him?
Yeah.
So we loan a lot of equipment out, and how many people in here have raised chickens? Okay, so one, and I think you mentioned that there's a lot of chickens, and
We have a lot of.
yeah,
chickens.
the chickens are just a prime example, and I'll get a little bit more into chickens, but part of this program is to loan equipment that kind of helps people resolve some of these issues, and electric fence, I'll talk about that.
You loan those?
We loan them, yep. So we have this loan program, and the idea is if somebody's having an issue, like if you have a chicken coop and bears are getting after your chickens, we will loan you a fence for a short term, might only be a couple weeks, depending on the situation and the demand for that fence. But we will loan equipment with the idea that it's showing people the effectiveness of the equipment, and the goal is to hopefully get people to make the investment on their own. So we do a lot of that. But we'll talk a little bit about, so many of the dumpsters that you see on the landscape are plastic topped or no top. There's simply no barrier to a bear. And, you know, you can look, you know, you see these dumpsters everywhere, garbage overflowing, and, you know, remember, garbage is the leading cause of most of our bear complaints in the state, or one of the major contributors. So, you know, unsecured garbage is a biggie. And there's certain places in New Hampshire, there's towns where garbage issues with bears is just a perennial problem that we deal with. And you know, when bears get used to getting garbage in towns, you know, they just keep coming back and keep coming back. And they, you know, they can be challenges to resolve, but the answer is bear-proof containers. They're out there. There's small ones, there's big ones. There's all kinds of options, but you know, if you have a dumpster, you really need to pressure your dumpster company to provide a metal top. It can be challenging at times. Some of the companies are not really great about offering that up, but most of them have them and they do work.
Was that top left one bear-proof?
This one is bear-proof.
Wow.
Some of these smaller commercially made ones are kind of expensive. Some, you know, they can run anywhere from $200 to $300 a piece, but I'm going to show you some potential options to get around that. But there's a human element. You know, you can put the best equipment in place, and it requires people to take the initiative to do the right thing, and that's not always the case. You know, this is a perfectly good bear-proof dumpster, but the door's got to be shut and locked. And I don't see this down in this part of the state, but I see this up north, and I'm embarrassed to admit that this was actually at a fishing game facility quite a number of years ago. But, you know, that's not the answer. You know, plywood full of nails is not the answer, you know, and it's just ineffective. So, you know, go about it the right way. Get the right tools in place from the get-go. Unfortunately, some of those smaller bear-proof containers are kind of expensive, and that is kind of a roadblock for a lot of people purchasing them. So there are some other options. The yellow one is a bear-proof container. The problem is it's a screw on top, and they're kind of a pain to deal with, but if you don't mind, you know, hugging it with your knees and working it, you can save some money that way. But there's also, if you take the standard garbage can that you buy at any of your box stores, which really are not bear-proof, you can add this latch system to them. We can't quite call them bear-proof, but we can certainly call them bear-resistant. So, you know, that's a trick you can try. It might keep the honest bear out. But, you know, little things that you can do to try to make it just more difficult for an animal to get into these containers. But I do, you know, there are things that people can do on their own. And first is, if the attractant can be removed, remove it. You know, don't try to be that person that feeds birds spring, summer, and fall. You know, remove that attractant. If the garbage can be put in a secure garage, put it in there rather than out on the front step. So you know, most effective is if you can remove that attractant or secure it really good. That's the first number one. Yes.
Isn't there another reason to stop with the bird feeders too? Isn't there going to be a
Well, that's a really good point right now. So we're dealing with a real uptick in avian influenza in birds in New Hampshire. So there's no quicker way to spread that than to congregate wildlife at a feed site. So that's, you know, it's really important and another really good reason not to be feeding birds. Bears find food with their sense of smell primarily. So think back to that garage door that had the hole ripped out of it. You know, the bear knew the garbage was in there because the garbage stunk, and the bear was able to detect it. So you can try to fool the nose of a bear. With your garbage, put it in a plastic bag, tie that off, and then put it in an airtight garbage can. That's kind of a double layer to hide the smell. Use ammonia as a cover scent to kind of mask the smell of the garbage, and also that is kind of noxious to a bear's nose. You know, I wouldn't do this. This would not be a surrogate for putting the garbage can in the garage if possible, but if you don't have that option, if your garbage can has to be outside, you know, bag it and put it in an airtight container and use some ammonia. So just some ways to make it not so easy for the bear to detect it. Make noise. You know, when a bear wanders into somebody's yard, they're waiting to be told no. The problem is not enough people tell them no. You know, they take pictures from their living room window, and that's great that people appreciate bears. We like that, but once you've done your picture, go outside and yell at the thing and tell it to leave. You know, make noise. The old pot and pan, air horns. Just make the experience a negative one for the bear. That will help. Air horns work great. You can pick those up at kind of your marine boating store. We do have pyrotechnic pistols that we loan. You know, bears respond to noise reasonably well. Again, this should be done in conjunction with securing the attractant. Call your dumpster company. Be demanding. Tell them, you know, the dumpster that I'm paying for is not sufficient. I'm requiring a metal top. So you got to kind of, you know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of scenario. What doesn't work on bears is things that you shoot at them, like rubber bullets, those type of things. Bears, that doesn't mean anything to a bear, and they can be inhumane. You know, this is a bear that was shot with a rubber bullet close range, and it penetrated the animal. We brought that bear to a vet and had the rubber bullet removed. So, you know, if you're offered that stuff to deter bears, just decline it and worry about securing the attractant and being noisy. But electric fencing, for you people with chickens, does anybody have raised bees here? Any beekeepers?
My son has bees and chickens.
Okay, does he have electric fence?
No.
No, you've been lucky. But, you know, electric fence is a really helpful tool for keeping bears out, as well as other critters, depending on how you construct your electric fence. And this video won't play, but if it did, it would show this bear come up. It's curious about what these strands are. You know, bears don't. The reason electric fence works on bears is bears don't just cannonball through stuff. They want to know what things are. They use their nose to check things out. And when they make contact with electric fence with their nose, that bear, you know, does this and runs off. And that's really all it takes. It only takes 1 or 2 times, and that bear learns what that fence means. I mean, it's really impossible. Your son's been lucky you don't have bear issues raising.
He was in Hampstead, but I'm gonna fix.
Yeah. In fences, there's all kinds of different types of fences. There's these poultry netting type fences. There's the hot tape strand fences that I showed. And a lot of it's described, and you can give Dan or I a call, and you know, if you have questions on fencing, you know, it's pretty easy to set up, and it's extremely effective. We have a variety of chargers used to electrify the fence, depending on if you have access to electricity, or if you require battery-powered chargers or solar-powered chargers. You know, there's a lot out there, and this is all covered in the chicken brochure. And in the end, depending on how much you need to fence, it's not an ungodly cost. And the thing to remember is this equipment lasts for years. You know, this isn't an annual cost. This is a one-time cost. And the equipment that we are loaning out, that we loan, pick up, move, reset up, you know, some of that equipment we've been using for 10, 15 years, and it's still working effective. So, you know, if you think about the duration of this equipment, it's really not a big cost. Important part of electric fences is maintaining them, you know, keeping vegetation under control. You know, when Dan and I go to a place where a bear has gone through an electric fence, it's generally because the fence hasn't been properly maintained. It's been shorted out by vegetation. And bears know how to capitalize on a weak link. And so it's important to maintain your fence. We do recommend baiting a fence. You know, if you own chickens and you have a fence up, you don't need to bait that fence all the time, but if you happen to see a bear in your back field one night, wouldn't be bad idea to take a piece of tin foil, smear some jelly or peanut butter on that, and fold that right over the the fence wire or the fence tape. And what that does is it draws the bear in. The bear is attracted to that bait, gets a wet mouth on that and gets blistered, and it just speeds up the learning curve. So just some tricks to making electric fences more
What about that
effective.
one on the lower left?
So that's actually a bottle cap, and that's more of a gear.
Yeah, they make, commercial grade bait holders, they call them. So instead of using the tin foil and peanut butter, you can put something in this cap that you just twist right onto.
I just didn't know if you were warding off all the wine people.
I mentioned the rule about FIS 310 is really about feeding bears, and that can be, you know, the guy handing the apple to somebody with a bird feeder. But basically, it reads that if you are attracting a bear with food, and you're attracting bears and causing issues, or putting the bear in an uncomfortable situation, there is a rule to address that, and that's really how we've been able to go after all the bear feeding that we've seen in the state. The other unique thing that a few towns are doing is they're passing town ordinances at their local level, and these are usually passed by a select board, enforced by the local PD, and these ordinances range from, some of them address only garbage storage, some address garbage as well as the feeding of wildlife, including bird feeding. So, you know, just another tool in the toolbox. You know, as a town, if you decide that, you know, you want to see the community do better with their garbage in an effort to reduce bear issues, you know, you can do something at the town level. So they can be effective. They really require the support of the police department. If the police department isn't excited about it and willing to enforce it, then they're kind of a waste of time. But when they are, they're very effective. Chickens. Again, another major contributor to annual complaints. When most people get chickens, they're thinking about how to contain the birds, how to keep the birds contained so they're not getting out. They're never thinking about how to keep critters out, and you need to be. We deal with a lot of coops that simply aren't a barrier to a bear or a barrier to most critters, and you know, that's not the family dog laying there. A lot of people, I don't want to say a lot of people, but there are people that are resolving their chicken issues lethally and shooting bears, and you know, that's not what we want to see. You know, we want to work with people, we want to resolve these issues. This is the type of fencing we're primarily using. It's this hot tape. We select this one because it works good, but also because it's easy to put up, take down, move around. But there's all kinds of fencing options depending on what you need. But this is how some people are dealing with it, and it's just an inappropriate way to resolve a conflict, in my opinion. And it's become an issue as far as orphaning cubs. You know, I actually, one reason I was a little late today, I was picking up 2 orphan cubs up north, but thankfully they weren't because the sows were killed. But as the summer gets going, Dan and I deal with a lot of this. You know, people call up and say, I shot a bear in my chicken coop, there's 3 cubs up in a tree, you know, come and do something with them. And, you know, it's just, it's unnecessary. So we're trying to get people to think different and do different. So I've blabbed enough. I'll just finish with a picture of a pretty big male black bear on the White Mountains of New Hampshire during spring. And Dan and I are happy to take any questions people might have.
Thank you very much. How old does the average bear get to be in New Hampshire?
That's a really hard question, I'll tell you why.
I figured.
If you look at the average age of bears in the harvest, for females it's generally going to be between 5 and 6 years of age, and males are going to be around 3 to 4 years of age. But that is because younger bears and male bears are more vulnerable to harvest because of behavior. It doesn't necessarily reflect what the age of the population is. Point being is, when we look at, and we age bears through, every bear that dies in New Hampshire, we collect a tooth from. And that allows us to calculate that animal's age. So, you know, that will be the average age of males and females, but every year we have a percentage of bears that are living into their 20s and even early 30s. So that tells us that there are bears that are getting over that hump and living into older age classes.
How, you know, a female, how long is she able to bear little people?
So they can start at age 3, and we've certainly seen that in our population. We've seen younger bears. You know, historically bears didn't reproduce much before like age 5.5, but we're seeing younger bears having litters. And bears can have litters into their late teens, even into their 20s, if not older, you know. We certainly see females that are well into their 20s still having cubs. And I didn't mention it, but I didn't talk a lot about bear biology tonight, but bears have young every other year because they keep their young with them for 18 months. So females are bred in the summer. Their cubs are born mid-January in the den, and then they keep those cubs with them for 18 months. So that puts them on an every other year cub production cycle. And a typical litter for New Hampshire bear is 2 to 3 cubs. But like I said, we're seeing some situations where we're seeing, you know, 4 cub litters. Yes?
What should you do if you are confronted with a bear? That you've either gotten in between the bear and its cubs, or you've walked out and not realized the bear was there, and the bear is not backing down?
Yep. So
What's the biggest, should you be a big target? What should
So
you
there's different schools of thought on what being big and aggressive to a bear is a tool that Dan and I could use on a bear because we have a lot of experience being with bears. You can intimidate bears and dominate bears, but to the public, we are suggesting taking a very neutral approach. So if you walk out to throw a bag of trash in your dumpster one evening, and all of a sudden you're around the corner and you're face to face with a sow or any bear, when you get close to a bear like that and it doesn't know you're there, its typical response is to do some huffing and that type of thing. And that's the bear's way of telling you, I want you to back up. I don't want an encounter. I need space. So, you know, what we recommend to people is, if you see a bear at a distance, make it known of your presence. You know, maybe say, "Hey, bear," you know, make normal noise so the bear knows you're there, and usually the bear will take off. If you find yourself in that situation where all of a sudden you're close to the bear, you know, you obviously startled the bear. Talk in a calm voice, "Hey, bear," and that's keeping you calm. And it's telling the bear that, you know, you're not yelling at the bear, you're not escalating, you're not getting aggressive, and you're backing away.
back away
And just put
and
space.
keep eye contact with them?
Yes, eye contact, that's another, some states you'll read, they say, don't make eye contact. We recommend eye contact because
Okay.
by maintaining eye contact and talking in a soft voice, non-escalatory voice, you're telling the bear that you're not scared of it, but you're also not, you're not intimidated by it, but you're also not acting aggressive. Now, with that said, if you're in your house and the bear's got your bird feeder bent over out there, that's when you get big, loud, and aggressive. You know, because, you know, if anything was to happen, you could just retreat to your house. But the other thing I want to mention about bears is their least developed sense is their eyesight. So lots of times, if you see a bear at any distance, lots of times it might look at you and not do much, or it might get up on its hind feet and do this. And a lot of people take that as a bear being aggressive. The bear doesn't know what you are, and it's trying to wind you. Their sense of smell is exceptional. So they're trying, you know, when they get up on their hind legs, they're trying to catch your wind and determine what you are. But their eyesight is not their strongest sense. Yes.
How many bear calls are happening down here now? So like, I can't remember the last time we had, that I've seen a bear down here. It's just recently this year, we had bunch of
Few years ago.
bears running around a few years ago.
So I'm gonna let Dan take this one, because Dan deals with the southern part of the state a lot more than I do.
Yeah, can't speak for Litchfield itself, but, you know, over towards Amherst, and certainly even down to the border, we have been getting a fair amount of calls every year. You know, by fair amount, I mean, you know, I'd say a couple dozen, I'd say complaints per year. And a lot of that we see more in the agricultural damage than I'd say complaints, you know, at homes. But like Andy talked about, you know, it's certainly an expanding bear population from both sides, north and south, so.
Follow-up is, around here, where it's pretty much suburbia, we don't have
Yeah.
huge stretches of wilderness. Where do they live?
Well, they're highly adaptable, like Andy said, you know, they can, and they have larger home ranges, so they can, you know, move through these pockets of habitat, you know, to find food.
So
They're
they
just
have a
transient,
home.
they don't have a home base.
Well, I'll let you answer that more.
So it depends on their age and their social structure and food conditions, you know? If it's poor food periods, they probably travel a lot more. If it's really rich food, they don't have to travel much, but bears are living in these little tiny pieces of woods, and people are unaware of their presence until all of a sudden they spot your bird feeder. Dan was dealing with a adult female that had, didn't she have 4?
Yeah, so an example would be Bedford every year, always has a lot of bear sightings. And yeah, a good example was last spring in Bedford. I got called early March, you know, snow was just receding. And there was this small patch of woods surrounded by houses on all sides. It was like an island of woods. And there was a sow, a female bear with 4 yearlings that was denning in a tree all winter there. And really nobody had any idea, you know, as much that she was there until she started to come out in the spring. You know, she was obviously around there in the fall as well. And then, you know, that's when we had to, you know, just let people know that, you know, this bear's around, she's gonna be looking for these easy food sources. But I mean,
Would she be, when you say denning in a tree, would she be underneath in the tree?
that was actually, she was in the cavity of the tree, was an old hollowed out willow tree. So she, you know, probably, she was about 10 feet up in that tree, there was a large opening that she was using.
The sow.
The sow and the cubs, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it was a really big tree, it was pretty big.
Are they nocturnal or diurnal or?
Both.
Yeah.
You know, generally peak times dawn dusk, you know, that's kind of peak foraging times for bear, and at night as well, but, you know, it depends on the, I mean, we've seen bears get really creative and start getting active during the day because they know the food's available. For example, I'll use Berlin as an example. It's an area where we deal with a lot of issues with bears and garbage. Those bears learn the day that garbage is put out curbside for pickup, and will be active all morning that one day a week because the garbage is there, but every other day of the week you won't see a bear much past 6 a.m. in the morning. So they have the ability to adapt, but in ideal conditions, dawn and dusk mostly, until you start getting closer to fall. As you start getting closer to fall and they need to eat lots of calories, then they'll be active throughout the day.
Can I ask you, have you ever had bear problems with your chickens?
Not this year, but when, a few years ago when it came through, I had empty beehives, and it knocked over the beehives, it knocked over the feed cannon, which is outside the pen, didn't bother the chickens, didn't seem to like the feed either, just one way.
Yeah.
Are you closer to the Hudson line?
No, I'm over, on Pinecrest, so
Okay.
what's behind my house.
Okay.
But I did have a question, so when I go out to lock up the chickens, it's after dark. Should I make noise when I'm going out in case it's around, or?
It wouldn't hurt, you know. It wouldn't hurt. That way, if the bear's out there and he hears the noise, he may just scoot off. You never know he's there. and it lets him know that you're on your way, and it will typically move off.
I gotta think that if they were getting chickens in Litchfield, that we'd hear about it on the What's Up page. People like their chickens a lot. They really do love
Oh,
their
it's
chickens in
crazy.
Litchfield, yeah.
I just have a question regarding the increase in population. Coyotes, I know that if you take out the coyotes, they're gonna reproduce. People think that they're kind of taking away the coyote population, which they actually reproduce more to offset that loss. Why the increase in bear population?
Well, the increase in bear has been, there's several factors going on. Historically, if you read the literature on bears, you know, they had to be in real remote areas, couldn't intermix in human environments. Well, that's we've been proven wrong. Areas of the country that have the highest bear populations are New Jersey and Connecticut. You know, bears are living in highly developed areas. Here in New Hampshire, and there's several things going on. Although we've been increasing bear hunting seasons, our harvest rate on bears is still pretty modest. Also, there's some data suggesting that the reproductive rates for bears have increased, which I think is linked to all the human foods they have access to. You know, these bears no longer are dependent on these fluctuations in annual food. You know, a particular female bear that's living in amongst houses can get to her necessary weight every fall because she can supplement her diet. So I think there's a lot of things going on, but I think it really relates to their adaptability, the fact that bear harvest is modest, and the fact I think access to human foods is having an influence on their reproductive success.
Thank you. And I like them, by the way.
Yeah, good. No, they're good critters.
They took down my bird feeders though last year. And then my dad's like, no, it's a raccoon. I'm like, no, my shepherd's poles. And he drove over from Hudson and he's like, oh yeah, no, that's not
Yeah.
Off topic, what's up with the turkeys? We got turkeys all over the place. The population, you have to
Can we
graph
get
on
the
the
bears to eat
turkeys.
the turkeys?
Right?
They're
That would
everywhere.
be awesome.
No, they eat the
Massive
ticks.
flocks.
They eat the
30
ticks.
or 40
they
in a block.
don't. They say the babies eat the ticks.
Well,
but
ask
they
him
don't.
if they
Yeah,
eat the ticks.
do the turkeys eat the ticks? Heard it's a wives' tale.
I mean, I think they certainly eat insects. So I think, they will eat ticks. I wouldn't say they're, decimating our tick population. The more turkey there are. But no, there's, certainly a lot of turkey in southern New Hampshire. You see them more, grouped up in the wintertime is when we get a lot of calls, a lot of complaints, because again, they're going to bird feeders. And if somebody's feeding birds, then starts feeding turkey.
We have street gangs.
Yeah, we've had some
We
issues.
You go down 3A, you might see what in that field? 40 of them?
Lockville Pinecrest, we have
Yeah, I did
30 to 40 a day.
And they're highly adaptable
They're
to,
taking over.
suburban.
I know, that's what we're gonna
Right.
talk about.
Yeah.
Sorry,
but-
go ahead.
but
Right, if
is
you
it
get-
illegal to feed them too? Because there are people feeding them.
I don't think there's any rule.
No, I
against
don't think there is.
bear and
Right.
occasionally deer.
Right.
When you have those issues, but, waterfowl and.
What's the negative about the turkey?
I don't think there's any negative, they're just
Oh, okay.
everywhere, yeah.
There's a lot of them.
They're gonna take over.
I'm entertained by them, but if there's something bad about them,
Well, you can,
They can-
if someone's feeding turkey and congregating them, the neighbors sometimes have issues because then, there's turkey who are defecating on their lawns. They will,
Oh, yeah.
turf up lawns a little bit, make dust baths.
if that's what we're worried about, I'm more concerned about geese.
Yeah, right. These, certainly.
And don't forget, the reparation of the turkeys up here in New Hampshire is really a success story.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because we had given, was it Pennsylvania,
it was
a
West
bunch of
Virginia.
fishers,
West Virginia.
West Virginia,
Yeah,
and that they have burgoyned up here is just, it is amazing. And they do eat the ticks, because my dog doesn't have any on the property.
Yeah, okay.
They live in harmony amongst all the houses, it's unbelievable, they go from yard to yard to yard.
They can be aggressive though.
Oh, yeah.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they're nasty. They're nasty.
Yeah, they can
Really,
be
I've never
right.
been
So can
chased.
geese, so can geese. be
Yeah.
chased, yeah.
They train geese.
You
to
got a
be
gang in
watched.
front of you and you're in your car trying to get down the road, they're like, oh.
We're here.
Yeah,
So,
that's why I have to take.
fun
my
fact for
down
you guys,
Washington Pine Crest.
we had a couple of years ago, there was a turkey crossing the street. I think it was right up here, and the turkey gets out in the middle of the street
Yeah.
and then goes in full
The
plumage
tom, yeah.
and blocks the traffic and lets all the other turkeys go
Yes.
by.
Yeah.
And that ended up going viral, and the guy in town, it is something like 200 million views worldwide of the Litchfield turkey.
What's your name, Jay?
Sir Albuquerque.
No, but
It is hunting season next month for turkeys.
Starts next weekend.
Next
This
week,
this
I'm
coming
sorry.
weekend
I
is
knew
your
it was
weekend.
coming.
Put your orange on.
Yeah, orange.
You won't
is
see
good.
it.
Yeah, right?
No, they get
They
the
all
memo.
know.
I don't know how they do
Hunting
that.
season.
A week before Thanksgiving, they're everywhere. 2 days before, where'd they go?
They know.
Yeah, no, it is hunting season for them coming right up.
But we once had a cat who was very curious, they had a whole mess on the thing, and the cat was out there curious, because the tail was up. And one of the females kind of comes to him nodding and bobbing like this. I swear the cat just went back underneath the pickup truck. But it was not a retreat, it was a strategic relocation.
I had one last one, again, off topic. How's the moose population doing? How's the coyote, bobcat, how are those populations?
You're not gonna say it?
What was that?
You're not gonna say it?
Nope,
What do you think?
You're not gonna say mountain lion?
well, we know there's stories, we know there's stories, but you're not telling us, but that's, and there are UFOs too.
So moose continue to struggle.
I think we have
The
one.
biggest issue for moose
We
is
used to have.
winter
these,
ticks.
Horse balls,
Winter
I've
tick
seen.
infestations, and we're experiencing what's turned into a pretty bad year right now. And it's all related to shortening of winters. You know, the factors have been right to really allow ticks to take off. You know, shorter winters, those ticks are dropping off the moose this time of year to lay egg. Well, we're a little past the tick drop, but they're dropping on dry ground and being very successful rather than dropping on snow and either getting eaten or dying. So, you know, that issue is, it varies from year to year. Up a couple of years ago, we felt we were seeing a little uptick in moose numbers again, but this year we're experiencing a lot of mortality. So that continues to be an issue. Coyotes, I couldn't even fathom a guess. They seem to be doing okay. And bobcats seem to be doing very well.
We have a lot of
And
those
we're not
too.
gonna try no bobcat hunt, right?
That is completely the decision of the director.
And the fishing game count commissioners?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any discussion on it right now, but,
I
you know,
missed that question.
Yeah, me too.
What was it, Jen?
In 2016, they tried to have a bobcat hunt, and there was quite a turnout in Concord against it, and they backed down.
but, you know, you talked about turkeys, you know, bobcats have really flourished, and I'm sure that the turkey population is a big part of that. You know, it's a good food base. A lot of the squirrel populations have been doing well, so, you know, the stage has been set with a lot of available food for these critters. And again, you know, bobcats, although they live in snow areas, they're not a deep snow cat like a lynx is. So, you know, a lot of our animals here in New Hampshire are really benefiting from these more mild winters we're getting. But there's also some consequences.
Yeah.
In the
Last year, there were no acorns. The year before was a mast year.
yeah,
And, you know, I guess acorns are a pretty important source of food.
very important.
For a lot of,
Yeah.
They, I did
Thank
want to
you.
get a comment to thank you from
Oh.
online, they're enjoying it, watching
good.
as well.
How come the deer population does not seem to be as affected with ticks as the moose are?
So deer evolved with ticks, so deer are good groomers. Deer are able to groom ticks off themselves. Moose did not evolve with ticks, so they don't have that ability, so they just get highly infested.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.